Hi, everyone. Welcome to our next in this Ask Microsoft Anything series today. In this session, we're going to be talking about Apple, so powerful Apple device management with Intune. My name is Tyler Costello. I'll be moderating the session today, and I'm joined by my friends Andy and Arnab. I will go ahead and give Andy the opportunity to introduce himself, and then Arnab, and then we'll go ahead and dive right in.
Thanks, Tyler. My name is Andy Surratt. I'm the PM manager for all of Apple device management at Intune, and excited to answer any and all questions related to Intune management of Apple devices today.
Hey everyone, my name is Arnab Biswas. I'm a senior product manager in the Apple MDM team focused on Mac management. Very excited to participate in the AMA today.
All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our first question. This is from Tin, and he says, where is the root cause of the error while enrolling macOS via the company portal? I got this issue unable to confirm setting after I had installed the MDM profile, and it looks like the company portal app cannot push the status to Intune. How to check it from the technical side?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Usually when the device enrolls, it should be able to contact Intune to provide the update and then pull status on the device. It seems like in this case, the device is, for whatever reason, unable to check settings on the device, which basically means unable to verify the policies that have come down on the device to report on compliance. And we hope that it does not persist, but if it persists, I would recommend contacting Intune support.
Arnab, I think that's a good point, right? You mentioned it's not the company portal itself that is sending status to Intune. It's really the OS and the MDM stack. And so we need to make sure that that's working. So.
All right, sounds great. So let's go on to our next question. This is from David. Will new features in Sonoma, such as account-driven user enrollment, be available on day 0?
Great question. User enrollment on macOS is currently not supported, but if this is something that is important to you, we recommend that you provide us that feedback so that we can prioritize that. It is certainly something in our backlog and that we'll be looking at in the future.
Arnab, I would say too, we haven't heard that many customers looking for account-driven user enrollment on Mac. So we definitely want to hear that and help drive that priority if it's something customers want to, add and utilize.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely want to hear from you and any specific use cases that you're looking for. So feel free to go ahead and provide those details in the chat along with your question. We'd love for this to be a two-way conversation that we have.
For sure.
So,
Tyler, before we move on, there are some day 0 features coming. Let's talk about those, not just account-driven user enrollment, but in Sonoma, you're going to see DDM status update releasing next month. We are quite excited about that. We think it's going to provide a much improved user experience over software updates. The nice thing is it's configure-based, right? So you can send down the config file. It provides an experience to the end user that notifies them that there is a due date for their software update. And that due date will ensure that software update occurs, but it doesn't interrupt the user in the minute that they're working. And it also allows the admin to send this well in advance of when they want the update to occur. This is a significant improvement over today's functionality across all MDMs, where you have to push an update to the device. So the device has to be active and it has to occur right there. So we love what Apple did with that. We were happy to support that early. And you're going to be seeing more and more of DDM features rolling out on Intune as fast as possible. We actually re-architected our entire policy. If you look at settings catalog, nearly all Apple policies, whether they're iOS or Mac, are there as long as there's not certificates involved. And those are all auto-generated this year. So basically, Apple provides these settings through their GitHub, through a YAML, and we automatically detect that and ingest it into our service and test it, and it's out in the next release. And so all of DDM is built right in there. And so we've been building out this architecture both to get all the new settings out to you fast. And now that Apple's new features through DDM are going to be settings-based, we're going to be able to continue to deliver these features fast. And so this is kind of the first year we've done it all automated. Last year, we did get settings through a manual process. It took a few hours, not very long, but this one was all automated. So be on the lookout for all those new settings and settings catalog, and certainly software updates.
Cool. Awesome. Seriously cool stuff that's coming from macOS and the DDM space, and the fact that Intune is able to just take those settings and ingest them automatically, and to be able to turn those around and offer those to our customers quickly is just awesome stuff. I'm going to go ahead and give some feedback from Marcus. We would love to know if and when there will be improved PKG install and bash scripting support for Mac. Currently, only .pkgs can only install apps into the applications folder. We would love the ability to install any .pkg as well as schedule and run bash scripts. Custom extension attributes based on bash scripts would be great too. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, for that question. And I'm happy to report that we are addressing this feedback. I believe in July, we launched the public preview of unmanaged PKG app install, which is basically the agent-based installation of applications. So while the line of business application path, which uses the MDM install application command to install apps, will continue to exist, but we are adding a new channel that utilizes our Intune macOS agent to install any more complex kinds of applications. And as of the September update of the Intune service, you will be able to also add pre-install and post-install scripts with that. So that means it really makes it much easier to then configure any application that is more complex nature or has a hierarchical structure, so it's not a flat package as Apple supports through the MDM stack. Or if you maybe have generated a custom package and it is not signed, in all of those cases, it becomes much more easier to deploy those types of application using this path. And we introduced this as a result of feedback that we have been hearing from our customers. If you look at our app management scenarios, we have really invested a lot into this over the last few years, starting with not requiring the app wrapping tool any longer to upload line of business packages, and then adding support for DMG type of apps, and supporting the PKG apps using installer commands is the latest in that line of innovation that we have done. So great to hear that we are addressing the needs that you have, and please use the feature and provide us feedback as to what more you would like to see in the app management space for Mac.
Arnab, I'm going to ask a preemptive question here, because then, everything we mentioned are for required PKGs and DMGs, and we know you all want to make them available in our company portal app. That is coming in the future. So as we made sure those apps could be uploaded into Intune and deployed, especially if you got those apps from another vendor and you just want to, drag and drop them over, we have you covered. And then, sometime next year, we hope to have some more news about when they'll be able to be available. But we know we have to go build that for you.
Cool. Awesome to hear all the innovation that we're doing in the app space and the app management space. So that's awesome. Really cool to hear. And also, I love it when we're able to take the feedback and then to be able to deliver that to you as well. So continue to keep that coming. And one great place to do that is going to aka.ms/Intune feedback. That'll take you to our feedback portal, and we'll be able to accept that feedback and drive that into our planning process and deliver more of the things that you're looking for. Also, if you're looking for roadmap information, if you go to aka.ms/Intune roadmap, that will give you some additional information where you can see what's coming up next in the Intune space. So, all right, let's go ahead and look at our next question from Ibuke. My two biggest questions: when will we see, one, public preview for platform SSO on Mac, and two, declarative device updates for iOS and iPadOS?
Thank you for that question, Ibuke. I can take the first one, and Andy can answer the second one. So for public preview for platform SSO, we are hard at work to support public preview for platform SSO. I do not currently have an exact date to share, but we are aiming to get the public preview out there by the end of this year.
And for iOS, iPadOS declarative software updates, that's coming in October, just like Mac. And so be on the lookout next month. It will be there.
Cool. Stuff to look forward to in October. All right, we have a comment from Samesh. This is coming from LinkedIn. When deploying apps via scripts, we miss the functionality of tracking app installs.
Yes, thank you so much for that feedback. And to rewind ourselves a little bit, when we first built support for scripts, the idea was to really unblock our customers so that they could go support the scenarios that were most important to them. However, yeah, it needed some heavy lifting in terms of writing scripts. And the idea with now building first-class support for different app types, such as DMGs and PKGs in Intune, utilizing the agent is meant to remove that burden a little bit from the admin side. So with the support that we have built for DMGs and PKGs, we hope that you are now able to utilize those paths to deploy your apps rather than using scripts. And if that is not meeting the
Hey, Arnav, I think I lost you. I wasn't able to hear the last part.
Neither was I. I thought it was me.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to finish that thought, Tyler, just to make sure. So if you have been utilizing scripts to install apps, we say, hey, go check out our new PKGs in public preview, and we'll be adding the post and pre-install script to that later in September. And that's really the solution, because that's going to be the full end-to-end. You'll be able to install those apps and get the status reporting back of those apps. Please check that out. And if there is any feedback about that not meeting your needs, let us know. We're still want to make sure that this is going to fill all those gaps for our customers.
All right, thank you for that. We'll move on to our next question. This is a question from Martin. We observe that user experience of the initial deployment of profiles, scripts, and applications when the user receives his new macOS computer and logs in for the first time is rather random. The user does not know what happens and when the device is ready for him to use. To speed things up, we even need to force quit the Intune MDM agent because it seems to stall from time to time. How will Microsoft improve this experience?
Well, I think what you'll see, we have a preview coming up for what's called the await config command. We already have it on iOS. I mean, that's the starting point. So that will allow that policies, and I know Apple now allows apps, and we'll be looking at scripts as well, to happen before the user exits the setup assistant, right? So that's the baseline. Additionally, we're revamping all of ADE. So we're migrating the profiles over to what we're calling ECV2 or enrollment configuration V2, which is similar to what our settings catalog. So all this data-driven UI. So we'll be able to build much more faster feature sets. And one of them is to create more control over what different profiles and apps get installed during that window. And so we're definitely, you'll see more and more of that in the next year about controlling what goes first, what's on there. I think it's going to be critical, not just for what you're choosing, but what we're putting on you. So whether it's platform SSO or even the Authenticator app, we need to have those on the device for part of our enrollment. And so we want to make sure those are there first to enable. And so yeah, we definitely acknowledge there's some more granular controls we need to add. And the first part of that will be the await config feature set coming out this fall.
Awesome. Thank you for that additional insight there. Anything else around the enrollment space that you're releasing that you'd like to talk about, Andy?
We're going to have a busy fall in general. So we have web enrollment for iOS coming next month in October, which is a revamped version of our BYOD flow. So the idea is that instead of leveraging our company portal, which adds a lot of extra steps, we will be using our architecture for just-in-time registration and combining that with a web experience to provide a much more straightforward flow. And then when the user is actively trying to be productive, right, in Teams or Outlook, they'll go through the registration of the device there for conditional access purposes. We want to hear feedback on it. This is, we think the flow is good, but can continue to be improved. And then that will be kind of our BYOD flow moving forward in combination with what Apple is releasing. So Apple also has released account-driven user enrollment. We have support in public preview for that, including enrollment SSO. Both of those will be going to GA next month. And then we do know that Apple announced account-driven device enrollment. And we don't have a timeline yet on that, but it's very similar to account-driven user enrollment, and we'll be working through when we can get that out. I think it's going to be important with account-driven as this rolls out that customers give us feedback. We do know there's already been feedback about app takeover and the discovery service needed for account-driven user enrollment that's difficult and is making some customers choose to go another path. And that's why web enrollment is still there. We ultimately want to provide choice, right? Whether that's MAM and you don't enroll the device all the way down to supervised devices. It's really about providing you a solution that can meet your needs. And so please give feedback on how we can continue to improve it. But ultimately, our goal, our vision, is to get to one single auth on the device for all enrollment flows. Like that's all your user should ever have to do. And so through some of the changes we can control in Microsoft between the Entra ID team and Intune, we've done that. We've been working with Apple and building off their technology on SSO. We're not there yet completely, but it continues to improve to that one single auth flow. And so you'll be seeing more. The other things that are coming out, we do have device attestation will be entering preview later this year. We think that's a great security feature that will leverage Apple's new architecture with the Acme cert, which will replace the SCEP cert for the management profile, which is hardware bound. It's bound to the secure enclave. Then we can also use the server-side integration to attest that it is the device it says it is. And then we'll be working after that preview to also include it in our conditional access flows. So really great security features there. And then I think the last big news is something called enrollment time grouping. And that's really for corporate devices. There can be delays if you're using a userless device and sometimes even user affinity corporate devices. So enrollment time grouping is going to allow you to go in the enrollment profile, target a static group so that when that device enrolls, it will already be part of that group. And the big benefit then is anything you have targeted, apps or policy, will go right down to that device. And so we think it's a much needed feature, and we think it's really going to help in a lot of especially shared device flows. And so be on the lookout for enrollment time grouping. And it will first come to corporate devices, and then we'll also be adding it to BYO devices, next year.
Wow, that is amazing. That is quite a bit of work that we have planned and quite a bit of new functionality. And it's amazing. And the theme that I hear from that is we want to improve the security. We want to improve the experience. We want to be addressing this feedback that we've received. But also we want to work with, or continue to work with, Apple as well to provide access to these new features in Intune sooner rather than later. So,
Tyler, can I speak to that? Like, yes, working with Apple is important because like something like the SSO extension, it allows us to do both. When do you get to do something more secure that's also a better experience, right? Like that's what the SSO extension has provided us. And so working with the partner like Apple to do that and enable that has been critical. And of course, our internal partners, Entra ID is critical to that piece as well. But we'll continue to improve and again, making it more secure, but also making it easier to use. That's key.
Absolutely. So first of all, I'd also like to welcome back Arnab. I'm glad we're able to get that technical issue taken care of. We look forward to hearing from you. And I'm actually going to throw this one right over to you on the theme of security. So this is a question that we have. IT security demands the use of 802.1x user certificates to accompany LAN, Wi-Fi, and VPN. Currently, we're using Intune SCEP workflow to deploy user certificates to our macOS computers. These user certificates are stored in the system keychain, which allows other user of the computer to make use of that other user's certificate. What can be done to let one computer be used by multiple users and have every user have their own user certificate in their own user keychain?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very insightful one. I have three things to say about this. The first one being that today, the way we think of our Mac use cases, it is built as a single managed user device. So all the scenarios that we build in, and including platform SSO that we are releasing, it's currently aimed at those types of scenarios. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't support multiple user scenarios. You could still enroll a device without device affinity and have multiple users sign in. But as soon as you start putting down certificates that access resources on the device, we need to be able to really validate who the user is and that we are providing the right set of certificates to the right user. In terms of validating that, we made some design choices where in the early days of supporting our resource access scenarios using certificates, that currently means that we deliver the kind of verification we need. We can only verify that this is the device that it is meant for, but not so much who the user is, which resulted in us making this choice. Now, we have been hearing this feedback from a lot of you that there is a business case and a need for providing the right certificate in the user keychain, because that also has an end user impact for it's a much better user experience for having to select that certificate. And we are working through that feedback to make sure that we can still meet the needs of security that we have while supporting that scenario. Now, to that end, and about multiple user devices, the good news is with...
I think we lost Arnab again.
Looks like we lost Arnab again.
So I think to finish Arnab's point there, so yes, V2 of Platform SSO that Apple announced at WWDC does support multiple accounts. And so as we roll out V1 support, we'll be adding V2. I don't have the specific timelines there, but I'm sure Arnab can share. But it is something we need to support. And then just going back to the user cert thing, we know this is an issue. I want people to know that. We know we need to fix this. As Arnab mentioned, there was a security reason initially why we went the route we went. But we also hear you loud and clear, and we need to make a change. And we're evaluating what our options are to both meet the one security issue we had, while also looking at the input that you have all provided us. In the end of the day, we we don't want to block you. And so we want you to adopt and you be able to utilize Intune as your management option. And so we will absolutely be looking and providing some updates, hopefully sooner rather than later, on what our plan is on user certs.
So it's a great question on security. Thank you for bringing that up and for providing the updates. I appreciate the mental synchronization there between Arnav and Andy. Thank you, Andy, for jumping in on that. I'll go to a roadmap question from Daniel. This is coming from LinkedIn. Hi, first, thank you for all the efforts and improvements over Apple management in the last years. When can we expect to have available macOS platform JIT SSO with Azure AD, now Entra ID?
Arnav, I think that's ultimately platform SSO, but this is a good point, right? So I talked about our onboarding and using just-in-time registration. We had just recently GA'd that on iOS. We are taking all of that over to Mac. And Arnav, I'll let you get into that specific, but ultimately we have rebuilt our architecture. So on iOS, on Mac, on iPadOS, there is a single structure. It is that the SSO extension now will do the registration of the device. And then when the user is attempting to be productive in the Office app of choice, we will just in time register that device there and then, because that's what the user is trying to do. They want to be productive. They don't want to go to the company portal. They don't understand why they're going to the company portal. So we're going to bring the management experience to them when they need it. And platform SSO is going to leverage that. And Arnav, I'll hand it over to you to kind of get into the detail.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So far,
okay, so
right.
Are you back?
All right. So for the platform SSO just-in-time registration, so in terms of as Andy was saying, that what we're building for iOS, we are now bringing that to Mac. So platform SSO is really our first scenario that utilizes that. And so if you have enrolled a Mac into Intune, you're aware that it also goes through the Azure AD registration, or the Entra ID registration now. And that's used to simply put a certificate with a device ID into the system keychain, which could still be backed up and wasn't as secure as it could be. And with the platform SSO and just-in-time registration, we are actually upgrading that. And it's called now AAD joining the device, which actually creates the device certificate and puts it in the hardware-based secure enclave on the device. So it is actually phish resistant and cannot be backed up to the cloud. And that is what device compliance checks and the AAD registration record will be based off going forward. And the other benefit from the user experience point of view is that although the SSO extension needs an app and it still comes down as part of the company portal, the end user no longer needs to launch the company portal. When they click into the notification that tells them that, hey, you need to register the device to set up your single sign-on, and that is all natively macOS telling the users to do that. So it should feel very familiar, and it all happens within the SSO extension. And that is great because even if you are coming from an experience where you're just trying to access something and you get blocked, you no longer need to launch the company portal to get out of that experience. So it will feel like you're within the app and you're being told to remediate the compliance experiences. So yeah, we certainly hope that this is going to really delight both admins and end users alike, as it is going to be more secure and the experience is going to be much better with platform SSO.
Yeah, platform SSO for the win for improving the customer experiences again and making things more secure. So really cool to see that coming. Our next question is from David. Are there any plans for Apple TV support in Intune?
Hi, David. Yes, I think I get asked this at every AMA, and yes, we need to support this. It's on our backlog. I think like anything, it's keep sending the feedback. There's just a lot of different things we want to build, and as you can see, we've been busy, but we know that we need to do Apple TV. Apple just announced Apple Watch, right? Management, we have to support that, and I'm sure that fancy headset that they announced as well is going to need management. So we are already looking at ways to add all of those. And how do we build it once to be able to adopt these or any other devices in the future? I know that's not explicit and you wanted more of a timeline, but just know we've heard you, and we are looking at how to do that in a way that can both expand for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that you're looking for. I highly recommend that you go ahead and add that to the Intune feedback portal. As a reminder, you can get to that through aka.ms/Intune feedback. All right, then we have a question from Jaime. We have many issues with Intune compliance in Macs due to the workplace join key in Keychain. Would using Intune as the MDM for our Macs change the way this works? Computers on the daily are not sending device ID with browsers, and users think they're not enrolled in Intune anymore.
Number one, if that's happening, I think please do open a support ticket. That doesn't sound like things are working properly. But yes, I do think what we're building will help remediate that. It's all, the idea is that we've taken years of experience of compliance and CA, and we've taken this new technology and we've purpose-built it. And so, it's more streamlined and it's more direct. And things like, the SSO extension, you have to turn on with an MDM policy. So any information that's needed for registration comes down as part of that. Again, a direct send. It's not relying on other technologies. It's not an app config. It's not anything else. And so we believe that this is going to be much more stable architecture. We have it across all of Apple management. And so we believe that this is the right direction, and you won't be seeing those issues. That being said, you shouldn't be seeing them anyways. So, please go to support and let's understand what's happening there to make sure there's nothing wrong.
Yeah, and just to add to what Andy said, one of the limitations that we have with this current workplace join and the keychain is whenever there is a third party, so a third party developer that is trying to access the keychain, which is basically any kind of third party integration we have built in, and it needs to know the AAD device registration. It shows an additional prompt. So, and that's simply just Apple's safeguard, because a developer, an app that from a different developer is trying to access that information. So definitely, as we move to a form of registration that is in the SSO extension, which is supposed to support any app that is trying to serve this or is asking for this information legitimately, that should be supported there in a better experience.
All right, great. And just an emphasis again, if things are broken, go ahead, reach out to support. We'd love to understand the issues that are going on there. And that also helps us to improve the experience, not just fix the problem, but also to think through what we can do to actually solve the problem better. So feel free to go ahead and rely on our trained and skilled support teams to help you get back on your way if things aren't working the way they should.
Tyler,
sorry, go ahead.
That's a great point, right? So our new architecture was based on different support cases we had over the years, right? So, hey, I have an issue here with the fact that I'm using single app mode for company portal and there's only a 24-hour window, or hey, I can't get to the Wi-Fi to change that. Like, there was a different support cases over the years. And so we took all of that feedback, and it wasn't just we had to address the issue at hand, but it was like, hey, we need to make this better. We need to improve this so that this is not nearly as difficult and challenging for our customers. And so that all comes because of, support and feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. We take these things seriously. It's great to go back and to define trends from these support cases and then drive them into our product, like you've been doing. And it's great to see that, or that we've been doing, but especially here in the Apple side that we're talking about today. Question from Adam. Can we expect return to service for iOS to be in the September release?
We won't have it in September. I love return to service. I'm quite excited about what it will be, but we are working on it. The key thing, just so you can send down an erase command, also include a Wi-Fi profile with it, and an MDM profile in some instances, and it will erase and reset the device. Put in that Wi-Fi profile so it gets right back on the network, and then it will re-enroll itself. Great feature. And we think it will help a ton of customers, especially with reprovisioning things fast. What we're still trying to figure out is how to give you that Wi-Fi profile, like how to expose that as part of the erase command. And so we're working through that. It's something that isn't quite, there's no pattern, if you will, in our console right now for something like that. But we have some good ideas, and so we're working hard on that. I hope to have that as soon as we can.
Awesome. And a great place to look for things that we're working hard on, especially with things that are coming up soon. So if you have a question, is this coming up this month or is this coming up next month? A great place to look for that is in the in development document that we have. We update that every sprint. So one really easy place to find this, go ahead and bookmark it. It is aka.ms/intune-indev. That'll take you to that in development document. And we try to give insight into what's coming soon in Intune by keeping this up to date. So on to our next question. This is a question from Rafal. I read a lot of articles that Microsoft is working hard to embed DDM into Intune. We actually talked about that a little bit earlier in the session too. How Intune MDM admins can verify if and when device declarative management is supported in their tenant so that new DDM features can be utilized for mobile iPhone and iPad fleet.
Okay, yeah. So DDM's been embedded in your tenant since last year. We supported it first with just user enrollment, as that's what Apple did. But last year, when Apple announced it would be cross-platform, it went out right away. It is there, and the first feature is that software updates. So that's really the key way. So all of the settings are essentially just in the settings catalog. A lot of what Apple did in terms of the policies is they just repurposed the same ones and put them over into DDM, and they still are moving things, but you don't need to necessarily know the individual policies. As long as you go into the settings catalog and define them, if it's DDM based, we will send it down to DDM. But the first true feature that takes advantage of it, the first true new one, is software updates. So go check that out next month, and you can start utilizing it. I think with DDM in general, right, there's really three parts that excite us. And number one is, I shouldn't say that excite us. In general, the concept excites us. There's really three parts to be aware of. Number one, it's a bunch of new policy migrated over, right? So you might see your email policy, the restrictions policy. And so they're moving over policy. And that kind of works the same way that it did before. But you can take advantage of number two, which is it has more robust reporting. We're working on, even before we support DDM apps, the delivery of them, which Apple had announced at WWDC, but we still can't support. They're rolling it out later, I think either this year or right after. But we can do app status. So we are working on that. So you're going to see more robust reporting of apps in our console. And then the third thing is all about the actual declarations, right? That's really where the cool thing is going to happen, where you're going to be able to add two different policies and change them based on some type of predicate activation, right? So if you haven't seen it, look back at WWDC's 2022 presentation. Cyrus does a wonderful job of showing how the Wi-Fi policy will not be activated until the passcode policy is compliant. And that shows the power of what can happen with DDM. And so we have our own ideas, but we would love to hear about your ideas on this. I know we've said this a lot, but we truly build based on what our customers want. And so that's going to be the true power of DDM. It's going to be the ability for you to make decisions in policy, send them down to the device, and then have the device actually, perform those actions without having to check in at all. So we think it's going to be great for regular device scenarios. We think it's going to be amazing for shared and frontline worker scenarios. And so that's an area you're going to hear us start talking a lot more about in the new year for sure.
Absolutely. Very powerful stuff. So thank you for that. I'll go ahead and take the next question from Luis. Do we need the company portal app to manage macOS devices and or deliver apps? Arnav, is this one you can take?
Yes, of course. Thanks for the question, Luis. For enrolling a device, unless you're using manual enrollment, you do not need the company portal app to enroll the device. And for all the available app scenarios, yes, the company portal app is required. But if you are, actually, rather, let me answer from the Intune perspective. Intune uses the MDM capabilities built into the platform to deliver all the MDM payloads. That includes the applications that uses the install application command. So whether you have the company portal app or not, as long as the device is enrolled, it should be able to push down those required apps to the device. And for any feature that uses our Intune MDM agent, so that's the one that is sent down by the Intune, and for things like scripts, DMG apps, PKG, unmanaged PKG app installs that I was talking about earlier. Those types of features utilize the agent, so you still don't need the company portal, but the agent, which if you have configured any of the policies that require it, Intune will automatically push down. So really the two scenarios that company portal are required for today are like if you are doing manual enrollment, which the enrollment is kicked off by company portal or available apps that you want to show to your end users.
But Arnav, they do need it on the device for the SSO extension. So that's the one little caveat there. Yes. So while from a functional standpoint, you don't need to be using it, it does need to be on the device. And in general, I think this is important, right? So whether it's Mac or iOS, we've talked about the SSO extension and just-in-time registration. This is a change in our architecture. So for our scenarios, we are moving away from the company portal being required for enrollment. You're going to see on Mac, we intend to bring web enrollment there as well for manual enrollment. So the company portal itself just will not be needed for that enrollment flow. And with Apple's newest announcement of DDM apps, they have some functionality that was a great experience if you haven't seen it. It looks like the App Store in terms of giving download status and things. And so there'll need to be a new app type to take advantage of that and expose that. But, and this is big news, I think for some people, it can be a userless app catalog that goes on the device. And so we are quite excited to get our hands on that code and be able to start building that, because we know that's something that all of you have been wanting. So the company portal itself as an app will become more of an ancillary app. And then eventually it might be replaced by this userless app catalog and some other functionality. So we're going to really be talking to all of you to understand what your needs are and what this new potential app could look like, what features you currently use and don't need. We're going to be in that process of migrating. But yes, the company portal as the center of management life on Apple Intune is kind of going away. And we think that we can replace it with much better functionality for both enrollment and for the use cases after you enroll.
All right, I appreciate the detail. Hopefully that covers it. When you can get away from using the company portal, when you still need it on the device, when it just needs to be on the device versus when it needs to be actively used. But it's cool to see some innovation there, and moving away from company portal as being the center of Intune on the device. Being able to do additional functionality without it is awesome. So moving on, as we move into the last 7 or so minutes, a question from Troy. Is there anything in the works that would better help with the management of shared user devices, Apple and Android? So we'll focus on Apple with the folks that we have here.
This is Apple only. Yeah.
Yeah, for the Android, we'll go ahead and look at this question. I'll forward this on to the Android counterparts we have and see if maybe we can answer that offline in the chat itself. But let's go ahead and focus on Apple.
So I can at least start with iOS, iPadOS. So we already support shared device mode, zero touch provisioning. And I know that the Office apps are rolling out support for each of their apps. Teams already supports it. So be on the lookout if the M365 apps on a shared device is what it. Now, that being said, I know that a lot of you either are using another competitor that kind of has a login, logout experience or like a device check-in experience. And so that's something that we are looking at. In fact, we think that DDM is going to be the great way to solve that problem. And so again, looking into next year, that is something that we are going to be focusing on. And we already are talking to customers. We need to talk to more to make sure we get that experience. We had hoped shared iPad was going to solve a lot of customer problems. We think the technology was great, but we understand the limitations. And so we're going to go back and look at how we can build off of shared device mode and provide the experience that you, our customers, need. So that's on iOS. Arnab, do you want to talk a little bit about, I think here's your opportunity of platform SSO and shared devices there.
Yeah, it's a great segue actually. That was asked for iOS, iPadOS. So if you have looked at the latest WWDC announcements, Apple announced a whole bunch of new functionality that is coming as part of platform SSO on macOS 14 or Sonoma. And another caveat to that is using these functionalities requires usage of platform SSO 2.0. So that is what Apple is calling this new version of platform SSO. And some of the key features, key improvements that Apple announced are the ability to log in using your cloud provider account right from the login screen on a Mac, which is a great feature. It basically provides you the Windows-like functionality on a domain-joined device where you can simply come and log into the device without having to create a local account first. And that was really the feedback that we heard again and again from many customers as we talked about platform SSO. And it's great to see that Apple has solved that from the second user onwards. So one of the requirements is the device needs to be registered first. And that is only possible once the device is enrolled and you have the first account created. But this also opens up very interesting scenarios for shared device use cases, because now you no longer have to pre-create local accounts for many users. You could just have a device that is provisioned, that is AAD joined, and platform SSO is configured, and that means new users can sign in. Some other new features that are available with Sonoma are the ability to configure what rights a user gets. So this really goes beyond just the user signing in and goes into sort of a privilege management of those accounts that you're signing in with. Many customers today use open source apps like privileges to make sure that the user is a standard user most of the time, and they can request admin access when they need to. And this brings that, as well as additional functionality in terms of more custom granular permissions that you can assign the user at login. So there is really a lot of potential here for creating really great multi-user experiences on a Mac that we will certainly be looking at in the future.
Arnav, that does remind me, I think the first thing that we'll be doing is probably that userless app catalog I mentioned. So,
yeah.
That's, while that doesn't solve all issues, we do hear from customers that is a big pain point. So that is the other thing that we can include in the shared device And we'll be looking across iOS and macOS to solve that problem. So.
All right. Thank you for that insight. We're out of time for more questions, but I'd like to go ahead and give Arnab and Andy about 30 seconds each to give some final thoughts, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. We will continue to review the questions that are in the chat, and we'll continue to respond to those after this session. So looking forward to continuing the discussion there. I will go ahead and call on Arnab to give his last final thoughts here.
Yes, please keep your eyes on what's new in Intune. And if you haven't joined the community on Viva Engage for our Microsoft 365 Mac admins, please join that.
All right. Go ahead, Andy.
No, I just wanted to thank each and every one of you, all of our customers. I hope, we answered your questions honestly and open, and, we want to continue to make, Intune Apple device management the best we can. And that's only through conversations with you and figuring out how to solve these problems and the order to solve them. That's also important. We have to go in that. So thank you. Keep giving the feedback. And, if you've tried a scenario and it didn't work, please check it out again. We've been investing in a lot of different areas, especially on Mac, and it's worth a second look. So thank you very much.
All right. Yep. Thank you very much for your engagement today. Especially, we will have the tech community questions open for about 24 hours, and we will continue to monitor that and answer there. And then I would encourage you again to go and sign up for that community that came up. It is at aka.ms/macadmins. So go and join that community where there will be more open discussion about questions like this, the things that you brought up today. So thank you very much for your time, for your questions, for your feedback. It is very valuable. Thank you for spending your time with us today. So, take care, everybody.
Thank you all.